number 19, two kinds of thoughts, Dvedhavitakka Sutta in Pali. And very nice sutta, in my opinion. This is the Buddha talking about his practice before his awakening. And this is, to me, has always been one of those interesting things that the Buddha talks about his own practice before his awakening. Why does the Buddha do that? What is the purpose of talking about what he was doing here? And I think the obvious reason why he does that is because he wants to inspire us, and he wants to explain and say, this is what I did, you should practice in the same way, right? You should do exactly what I did. So he's basically trying to inspire us by giving us, saying, this is the path I practiced. But it is important it's very important in this situation to remember that the Buddha was a human being just like the rest of us. If the Buddha was not just like the rest of us, if the Buddha was some kind of God or some kind of special, what's it called? Whatever, if he is different from us, if he's not the same as we are, then of course his experience and his practice is not really applicable to us in the same way. It's only really applicable to us if the Buddha is human just like we are. If he had the same defilements, the same problems, the same kind of things that he was searching for as we have, and if he was the same person, then his practice becomes applicable to us. It's very important to think about the Buddha in the right way. Yes, the Buddha was special. He was special in the sense that he was able to find the path, right? To find this without any teacher. That, of course, is already pretty awe-inspiring. We are trying to practice the path, right? And we have got all the teachings, and still it is so hard sometimes. And he did it by himself. Wow, that's pretty amazing. So that already kind of puts the Buddha in a special position. But don't be careful not to elevate the Buddha too highly. If you elevate the Buddha too highly, then it becomes very difficult to relate to the Buddha's practice and to understand the Buddha in terms of actually being a human being, pretty much just like us. And we find this I will show this as we go through the sutta, because the sutta makes it fairly clear that is actually what is happening here. So keep this in mind, and then the sutta here becomes much more meaningful and powerful when we keep that in mind. So here we have starting the sutta from the very beginning. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, another Indica's park. There he addressed the bhikkhus, the bhikkhunis, the laymen and the laywomen. Thus, bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, laymen, etc. Venerable Sir, they replied, the Blessed One said this: Bhikkhus, before my awakening, while I was still only an unawakened bodhisattva, it occurred to me. Suppose that I divide my thoughts into two classes. Then I set on one side thoughts of sensual desire, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of harming or thoughts of cruelty. Then I set on the other side thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of non-ill will, and thoughts of on compassion, if you like, on non-ruthlessness, which sounds a bit strange, but anyway, non-ruthlessness. So, here we have the Buddha living at Savatthi. How many people have been to Savatthi? Many people have been to Savatthi? Yeah? Quite a few? Okay, great. Yeah, I've been there a few times myself, but Savatthi is quite nice. Quite nice that it's possible to go to this place in the present day. This was, of course, the place where the Buddha stayed the most, and where he would give most of his teachings. And then he says, very interestingly here, bhikkhus, before my awakening, while I was still only an unawakened bodhisattva. Right? So what does that mean? Bodhisattva? I thought there wasn't any bodhisattvas in Theravada Buddhism. What's going on here? Where is this kind of Mahayana intruding on the Theravada? What is happening here? And the answer is no, it's not Mahayana intruding at all. This is the Buddha talking about his prior to his awakening. He wasn't the Buddha yet, right? And what he called himself before his awakening, he called himself by this word, bodhisattva. That was actually what he used to talk about himself. And in the suttas, the time that the Buddha was a bodhisattva, most prominently is after his leaving the home life until he became awakened, right? While he was searching for awakening, that was the time he was a bodhisattva. So it doesn't really go back into past lives. It doesn't go back 4 incalculable and 100,000 eons or whatever it is. It doesn't do that. In the suttas, basically, it goes from the time that he went forward and decided to be a monastic. Now, there are certain suttas which also use the word bodhisattva prior to that, and one of those is the Acharya Buddha Sutta, with Majjhima 123. This is about all the wonderful and marvelous qualities about the Buddha, and this is one of the few suttas where it says that the Buddha, or not the Buddha, he was a bodhisattva even prior to that, and even while he was dwelling in a previous life in the Tusita heaven, he was already bodhisattva according to that sutta. But that sutta is rather unique, it's rather special, it has a lot of elements that are late, and you can see that again by comparative study with the agamas that I talked about before, many late elements. So personally, I don't take the information in that sutta as important as the later information, which basically is that he was a bodhisattva from the time that he left the whole life. So what does bodhisattva mean? Normally, bodhisattva is a Sanskrit term, bodhisattva is a Pali term. What does it mean? Usually it's translated, usually it means like enlightenment being. Sattva or satta usually means being, and bodhi means awakening or enlightenment. Right? So while I was unawakened, awakening being. It's strange, right? It's strange when you think about it. It doesn't really come across as very natural. And I think that the meaning of this word, and this was something that was suggested by Professor Richard Gombrich a long time ago, is that this word actually doesn't mean that at all. It comes from a different Sanskrit root, which is not sattva but sakta. And sakta means somebody who was intent on something, right? And so what it means then, and or what I think it is quite likely to mean, it's possible to say with certainty these things, but what I think it is likely to mean is that while I was still unawakened and intent on awakening, right? That is what I would take this word to mean. And then I think the meaning comes out much more nicely than this rather strange term awakening being, which to me doesn't really make all that much sense. So this is the first thing about the sutta which is interesting. One who is intent on awakening, and that of course only happens after you go forward from the home life into homelessness. That's when the Buddha himself was intent on awakening. So then it occurred to me, right? And the first thing, I divide my thoughts into 2 classes. So what he's doing here, he's understanding that there are certain thoughts that should be grouped together. Thoughts of sensual desire, ill will, and cruelty, says here, or harmfulness or ruthlessness. And on the other side, the pure thoughts, which are thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of non-ill will, this includes metta, and thoughts of non-ruthlessness, which includes compassion. So this is already an interesting point in its own right, this ability, and this shows you that the Buddha already had developed a lot of understanding, because he was able to understand very clearly the distinction between wholesome and unwholesome. This is what this is all about, right? The unwholesome thoughts on the one side and the wholesome thoughts on the other side. And this is not as easy as you may think it is, because these thoughts, as we saw in the previous sutta, the defilements can be very refined, right? Go down to very refined things. The desires that we have can often be about very subtle and minor things in life. The ill will can be also sometimes very, very subtle. If you haven't got full metta, it may mean that there's a little bit of ill will there, which is kind of stopping you from having the experience of metta. It's not really ill will that is active, it's more kind of this passive thing inside of you, which is blocking you from feeling compassion and metta to other beings. This is very refined things. And this shows that one of the things that we need to do on the Buddhist path is precisely to understand the distinction between the wholesome and the unwholesome. And as you move along the path, that distinction will start to change. Right? When you start to develop your mind, you start to put away some of your bad habits, some of your, whatever those habits may be, you put those away. Other bad habits will surface underneath, right? More refined bad habits. And then you have to look again and you have to say, oh, okay, well, these habits are coming now. And then you have to, again, divide them in and understand which ones are wholesome and which ones are unwholesome. And sometimes it is quite difficult to see these things. It's quite hard to actually take this all the way, because some of our attachments and things are so subtle and so refined and they're so attractive to us, they can be very difficult to give up. So it takes a lot of clarity to understand these things fully. And this is why on the Buddhist path, you find a lot of the Buddhist path is about contemplating your defilements, contemplating your mind and understanding the differences. This is what Satipatthana practice is about. When it comes to the Dhammanupassana, the understanding of Dhammas, if you read that, as I was saying just before, a lot of that is about understanding the five hindrances. Number one, what they are, because they are so refined, it is not obvious what they are. Well, sometimes it's very obvious, right? If you get really angry, you know exactly what's going on. But if it is very refined, it is not so obvious. So first of all, knowing what they are, knowing why they arise, knowing how that arising comes to an end, and knowing how they don't arise again in the future. So this is why this contemplation is so important, and why it is a fundamental part of Satipatthana practice. In fact, when you look at the overall idea of Satipatthana, what it is really about, you will see it is all about the juxtaposition. On the one hand, the impure mind states, on the other hand, the pure mind states. You have the Chittanupassana, contemplation of the mind. It is all. If you don't understand what I'm saying, please just, you can allow to raise your hand and let me know, because maybe sometimes I use hardy terms or whatever without really thinking about it properly. But on the one hand, you have the Chittanupassana, you have all the negative states of mind. Mind states which have desire, which have anger, or whatever. And on the other hand, you have all the pure mind states. The same thing with Vedananupassana, the contemplation of feeling. Exactly the same thing there. And the first Satipatthana, which is about the Kayanupassana, contemplation of the body, and that too is about overcoming attachment and desire in regard to the body. So really, Satipatthana practice, one of the main purposes of Satipatthana is to help you to understand the distinction between defilements and non-defilements, and how to overcome the defilements. And then you go to the Bojjhangas, and if you look at the Bojjhangas are the awakening factors, right? Same thing again. First of all, you have the Sattisambhojjhanga, which is the awakening factor of mindfulness, which relates. I've just been telling you, mindfulness is all about overcoming defilements, right? This is similar. And then you have the Dhammavichaya Sambhojjhanga. Dhammavichaya Sambhojjhanga is investigation of Dhammas, right? Very similar to the Dhammanupassana of the Satipatthana Sutta. Investigation of Dhammas is explained as understanding dark and bright states of mind. Dark is defilement, bright is not defilement. Understanding minds that are blameworthy and non-blameworthy. Right? Again, about defiled states and undefiled states. So much of the Dhamma, so much of this is precisely about understanding defilements and non-defilements. Because this is the only way you can overcome them, by understanding what they are. This is why this is emphasized so much. And this is why this is a very important teaching right here of the Buddha, this classification of the mind states into two different categories. So that is why it is interesting that the Buddha then says, next thing he says is, as I abided thus, diligent, ardent, and resolute. That's the next thing he says, right? So this is interesting because, well, first of all, let's get the translation a bit better. Diligent is appamada, right? Appamada really means more like being heedful. That's what it actually means. Heedful means being careful, right? Being circumspect, knowing, okay, is this bad, is this good, moving in the right direction. That's really what it means. Diligent to me is more like, working very hard, sitting at your desk, working long hours into the night or whatever. That's kind of diligent. So it means being heedful, careful, circumspect. Ardent, atapi, is really a synonym with being energetic. This means that you have energy, and resolute is closely connected to the forthright effort, so having effort. So the person who has effort, who is energetic, and who is heedful. Right? And that is what it means, to be heedful. That is what it means to be energetic, is just that, the dividing of your thoughts into two different classes. Right? Isn't Isn't that fascinating? Because what it does not mean is using your willpower, kind of gritting your teeth. I'm going to be kind, right? Or I'm going to force my mind into the right position so I can be kind. That is not what it is about. It's an aspect of wisdom to be heedful here. Because it is wisdom that it enables you to divide your thinking mind or your mind into two aspects. It is not your willpower, it's the wisdom power. So it is wisdom here that is described as being heedful, being energetic, and being having effort. That is an aspect of wisdom. So again, just the point I was making before, that wisdom has a very powerful part of the Buddhist practice, and much more so than you might think by just reading these things. But once you start to understand the implications, you start that is indeed the case. So as I said, as the Buddha abided thus diligent, or heedful, energetic, and with effort, the thought of sensual desire arose in me. I understood thus, this thought of sensual desire has arisen in me. This leads to my own affliction, to others' affliction, and to the affliction of both. It obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from Nibbana. When I considered all of these things, this leads to my own affliction, it subsided in me. When I considered this leads to others' affliction, it subsided in me. When I considered this leads to the affliction of both, it subsided in me. When I considered this obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from Nibbana, it subsided in me. Whenever a thought of sensual desire arose in me, I abandoned it, removed it, did away with it. Right? So this is great stuff, isn't it? How to deal with bad thinking. And of course the same thing afterward is also about ill will, right? So same kind of technique is used for all the bad thoughts. The first thing which is of course interesting here is that the Buddha says a thought of sensual desire arose in me. Later on he says a thought of ill will arose in me. Right? This is already quite important because it shows you that the way the Buddha talks about himself is in a way that we can understand very well. Same kind of problems that he had that we are facing in this world. And this is how you can see the humanity of the Buddha emerging from the suttas. When you read it carefully like this and you see the implications of reading things like that, you can see that it actually means that we're supposed to regard the Buddha as a human being just like us. And there's many other places in the suttas where similar kind of things are being said. There is, I think, in the Bodhiraja Kumara Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 85, to Prince Bodhi. And in that sutta, the Buddha says, talks about himself before his awakening. It says, before my awakening, when I had wrong view, right? Again, similar kind of thing, when I had defilements, when I had wrong view. So you see all of these things are there to kind of humanize the Buddha, make it more human, make it more like one of us. So these little indications I think are very important to take on board because it makes it more clear who the Buddha actually is and what he is not. So, as he did this, thought of sensual arose. And first of all, he understands, right? This thought of sensual desire has arisen in me. And already, as I just said before, this is already quite hard to do. In some cases, it's very obvious that sensual desire has arisen. In other cases, not so arisen, because it's very refined, very marginal, very hard to see. But then he thinks, and this is kind of the important point here, this leads to my own affliction. Affliction means suffering, basically. This leads to others' affliction and to the affliction of both. It obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from Nibbana. And then when he considers each one of those in turn, then it is abandoned in him, right? This is how he abandons these thoughts. So, of course, the interesting thing about this is that what he is doing here, he is using wisdom. There is no willpower being used here. All he does is reflect in the appropriate way. And by reflecting in the appropriate way, which is what you might call using wisdom, right? By reflecting in the appropriate way, it disappears. It is abandoned in him. So the abandoning of defilements, the abandoning of wrong speech, wrong action, the abandoning of all the bad things, it is by reflecting in the right way that we abandon these things. Which is very fascinating, isn't it? If you think in the right way, then these things are abandoned as a matter of course. Of course, when you undertake the 5 precepts, sometimes you have to kind of force yourself, okay, I'm going to keep these precepts, right? Because sometimes there are kind of temptations coming up or whatever. So you make clear boundaries. But ideally, the way to keep the 5 precepts is to do it through wisdom. So it happens all by itself, naturally. That's the ideal way of doing that. And there is a nice sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya that talks about 2 different types of powers. And these 2 powers, one is the power of reflection, patisankhana bala, power of reflection, and the other one is the power of development, the bhavana bala. And the power of reflection, says the Buddha, is the power which helps you to abandon the 3 types of unwholesome actions, right? Actions by body, speech and mind. That is done through reflection. Now the bhavana means like development. It refers to meditation practice specifically. Sometimes it is broader than that, but certainly refers to meditation practice. Now the bhavana bala, that is the development of the jhanas, the samadhi states, development of the 7 factors of awakening, which also really are about samadhi. So all that is about developing samadhi, but the overcoming of the defilements is not done here through bhavana, through meditation. It's done through right reflection. And this is the power of reflection, patisankhana bala, the fact that you use it in the right way. Actually, this is the way you abandon the defilements. This is exactly what the Buddha is saying here. He is reflecting, and by reflecting in the right way, you abandon these things. So how does this work? How can you just think and then abandon sensual desire, right? It sounds almost too good to be true. If most people try that, it doesn't work. So how does it work for the Buddha? And the reason why it works for the Buddha, or he's not the Buddha yet, he's the Buddha to be, the reason why it works for him is because he has an insight, he has understood what these things do. And this is the crucial issue here. So the crucial issue is, do you understand what sensual thoughts actually do to you? Do you understand their outcome? Do you understand where they're leading? If you really understand that they're leading to your own affliction, if you really understood that, of course you wouldn't think about these things. The reason why you have a sensual thought is because you think it's fun, right? You fantasize about something nice or whatever it is, you think it's good fun, right? If you're go on a retreat and you can't eat enough, and you fantasize about food, right? Or this is just how it is. But the Buddha says, if you really understand the danger, the mind just withdraws as a matter of course, because you understand that it's dangerous. There isn't really any fun there. And it's just like the simile I like to use, which is a very simple simile. It happened to me. I remember as a child, you had the hot plate in the house. My mother had just cooked something or something, right? And I didn't know it was hot, so you put your hand on it, and it's really hot, right? And so you don't have to think, oh, should I remove my hand or not? It happens automatically, right? You just withdraw it. It just comes back. It's like an automatic reaction. And this is exactly the same thing that's happening with the Buddha here. He doesn't have to. All he has to do is to remember that this is dangerous. It leads to problems. And the mind withdraws automatically, just like the hand withdraws from the hot plate. Exactly the same way here. So this is the power of reflection. You have to reflect so much, understand these things so deeply, understand that this is a dangerous area, and then you just guide your mind to the same reflection, and it withdraws straight away here. Now this is quite hard. For sensual pleasures, it actually is quite difficult, and one of the reasons why it's difficult is because for the majority of people, it's all we ever know, right? We don't really know about the profound happiness of samadhi. Once you know about the profound happiness of samadhi, then you can understand, because then you have a comparison, right? Then you can actually understand this. But before you have that, it's actually very, very hard to see. So you need to reflect a little bit, and And when you reflect a little bit, you withdraw a little bit, and then again, and withdraw a bit more. And gradually, as you do that, the samadhi becomes more deep, it enables deeper reflection, and these things kind of roll on as a consequence. But again, as I said before, the emphasis for most people should not be on reflecting on sensual pleasures. The emphasis should be on reflecting on ill will and anger, because that is much more destructive emotion and also much easier to deal with than it is to deal with sensuality. So I'm just talking about this now because it comes up first in this particular sutta. So, I don't even know if I want to get into what the dangers of sensuality are, because it is. I will talk about it later on. I'm going to get back to sensuality later on and talk a bit about the dangers later on, because. But really, one of the big dangers of sensuality, just to kind of say it at this point, is that you attach to things. And when you attach to things, you're asking for suffering in the future. Every time you attach, you know that attachment is going to be challenged. It's going to be broken up, right? Impermanence is going to come and say, and rip it away from you. So whether that attachment is to other people, to family members, to a husband or wife, if it is to your belongings, if it is to your career or your status or whatever it is, all of these things will eventually have to disappear. So in all of those cases, if you have attachments, you will suffer as a consequence. This is one of the things, right? It leads. There's more than that, and that is one of them. One of the other important things that people often underestimate is that sensuality is very closely connected to ill will. Very closely connected, because if you are attached to something and somebody comes along and kind of challenges the attachment, then you often get upset, right? If you think that if you are a husband, somebody's husband or somebody's wife, and you think that somebody else is interested in your husband or wife, that's it's easy to get upset, right? Or if it's your girlfriend or whatever, it's very easy to get upset because we have a vested interest in that person. So attachment and sensuality and anger are very, very closely related to each other. And you see that in the world. We're always fighting over things, fighting over relationships, fighting over the goods in the world. The economic cake in the world is only so large. If somebody else gets a larger slice, you get a smaller slice, right? It's unfair. This is how it often works. Of course, ideally, the cake grows, everybody can share more. But often it is like, that's why people get upset, right? When they see all kind of bad actions in the world. Recently seen all this. I don't know if you've read about these Panama Papers. Have you read about the Panama Leaks? Yeah. All these people in the world are supposed to be the leaders, right? And kind of dodging away, putting away things, and not paying their taxes and all this kind of stuff. And of course, it's easy to get a bit upset when you see that kind of thing, right? Somebody else is taking my share. I am poor. I am paying taxes, for goodness sake. These guys, they're wealthy, not paying taxes. What's going on? This is really unfair. And that comes from attachment, basically. That's why you get upset. The best idea is to say, okay, you shrug your shoulders. This is what happens. Okay, let's try to do something about it. But anger is not going to work, not going to help that. Just an example. So, this is how you see the danger in these things, little by little, and gradually you build it up. And you see it leads to other people's affliction, right? So if you have desire, if you have sensual desire, you know it's also going to be problematic for other people. Other people are going to suffer as well because of that. And because you have compassion for others, you say, okay, I better get away from that. And then you have both. Not only essential desire bad for you or the other person, usually it's bad for both people. Right? So because it's bad for both people, again, you have a similar kind of interest in actually withdrawing from that. And then the last one is when you reflect that it obstructs wisdom. It causes difficulties. It leads away from Nibbana. Right? Nibbana, extinguishment. It's a literal translation of Nibbana, extinguishment. It obstructs wisdom. Right? If you have sensual desire or ill will, it obstructs wisdom. Why is that? Because it distorts your outlook. If you are angry about something, if you have desire about something, you have a vested interest in that object. If you are attached to something, you have a vested interest. You're not able to see it clearly. Sometimes people ask me, they say, oh, well, but I have to have attachment to my children, right? If I don't have attachment to my children, it's not going to work. You know, this is how life works, right? And if I don't have attachment, I won't look after them properly. I'm going to do the right thing. But usually it doesn't work like that. Usually it's actually the other way around. If you are very attached to your children, if they do something wrong, then you get very upset because you have a very strong attachment, you have a very strong vested interest. This is my child, you're very proud of them, right? And you say to all them, oh, my child is getting really good grades at school, right, whatever, and you're really proud of that. And then one day they get bad grades. What happens then? You feel really bad, you feel terrible because you're attached to the idea of your child being very successful, getting good grades. And this is the problem. The more attachment you have in that area, the more it's going to have bad repercussions. So actually, less attachment is often good. If you have less attachment, then if your child does well, if your child doesn't do so well, okay, fine. As long as you're happy, as long as I do my best in helping you out and having a good life, that is more important. Right? So you have more, instead of being concerned about yourself, about you feeling good about your child, you're more concerned about the child's direct happiness rather than whether it looks good on you or not. My child, you feel proud of your child. Actually, it's not about you, it's about the child, right? Whether the child is happy or not. So lack of attachment gives you more clarity because you have less vested interest, and then you can start to see the child's or anybody else for that matter, you can start to see their true, what they really need, and then you can give them what they really need, rather than what you want from them, because it reflects on you. It's a big difference. Just an example of how attachment and desire, and also ill will distorts also our outlook enormously. When you have ill will, you think that what is wrong to do is right to do that, and you do all kind of bad things as a consequence. So wisdom is obstructed. You don't see clearly. You don't understand what you should be doing. That's scary, right? Don't you want to be wiser? Is there anybody here who does not want to be wiser? You probably wouldn't be here, right? If you thought it was better to be stupid and silly, not to have any wisdom, you probably wouldn't be here. Of course you want to be. Everybody wants to be wiser. Because wisdom means that we understand how to negotiate life. We understand how to deal with people. We understand in which direction happiness lies, in which direction suffering lies. That's what wisdom means. So wisdom is the greatest asset you can have as a human being. If you don't want wisdom, it means you don't know what wisdom is. That's basically what it means. Of course people want wisdom now. So for that reason, when it says here that it obstructs wisdom, Hanya Nirodika, cheapest, I'm throwing away the best part in life, right? By having sensual desire, by having ill will. What should I choose, ill will or wisdom? It's a no-brainer, right? It's pretty obvious that we're going to choose to be wise rather than having that, indulging in ill will or whatever. Still, it is hard to do. Sometimes you feel so self-righteous, you know you're right, so still you have a little bit of ill will there. It goes a long way along the path, but at least you have a little bit of understanding of the danger there. It causes difficulties, right? It causes pain, basically. When you have ill will, if you go to the feeling of ill will, it doesn't feel good. If you had the choice between a very relaxed and easy state and ill will, if you compare them, one is so delightful compared to the other one. One is very painful. If you compare sensual desire to a state of complete contentment, you will see that sensual desire is like this agitation, restlessness, like this burning inside which drives you forward, right? That's what sensual desire is about. It's about looking into the future, trying to acquire something. There's a very profound, restless and agitated energy that comes with sensual desire. It's not really nice. The only reason you think it's nice is because you are looking forward to the object which you're going to acquire. Oh, I'm going to get into this wonderful relationship, right? I'm going to run after this person or whatever. But actually, the feeling itself, if you don't think about the object of that you want to acquire, the feeling itself is not pleasant at all there. That's the craving, the feeling of desire inside of you actually is problematic. So these are all, actually, they're not very nice feelings. And once you start to understand that, and you start to have some idea of the meaning of contentment and tranquility, you have no doubt anymore where it is that you want to go. And the last one is, it leads away from Nibbana. So So doesn't sound very good, does it? So what is Nibbana anyway? Because sometimes we have Nibbana is kind of this word that sounds good. We're kind of told that it is good, right? So it kind of sounds good, but it's important to have some feeling for what Nibbana actually means. And a good translation of Nibbana is extinguishment. Things getting extinguished, and that gives you less opportunity to read all kind of things into the word Nibbana, but you don't know what it means. What is that gets extinguished? The things that get extinguished, number one, are all the defilements, right? They get extinguished. So all the defilements, all the craving, all of those problems, they go away. And one of the most important things that get extinguished is dukkha, is suffering. So if you are moving away from Nibbana, it means you're moving into suffering, into more defilements, away from peace, away from quietness, away from extinguishment of all these things. So instead of moving towards all these wonderful qualities that are there and available on the path, you're moving towards all the bad ones instead. So again, it is not something that you really want to do. So this is how the Buddha, not the Buddha yet, the Buddha to be, how he uses his wisdom to enable him to move away from these things. It's very fascinating, isn't it? And it shows you the power of reflection when you reflect in the right way. And then comes the sentence which is very interesting here. Never a thought of sensual desire arose in me. I abandoned it. I removed it. I did away with it. Right? These words that I'm reading there are pretty much exactly the same words as I was reading out in the other sutta. The translation is a bit different, but the Pali is actually almost exactly the same. The other one, it said, he abandons it, dispels it, terminates it, obliterates it, right? Here it says he abandoned it, removed it, and did away with it. But actually the Pali words are basically the same. So again, you can see this whole idea of abandoning, of obliterating, of doing away with things, which sounds so forceful and so powerful. It sounds like an act of will. It isn't. Everything here is through an act of reflection, through an act of wisdom instead. And here it is very clear that is the case. You use wisdom to abandon these things. You think about things in the right way. The power of thinking, if you use it rightly, the power of reflection is very, very useful on the Buddhist path. But it's all about using it in the right way here. Okay, so then that is all about the sensual desires. And then comes the paragraphs that are probably more important because the focus is on ill will. And the Buddha to be says, as I abided thus, diligent, heedful, energetic, and with effort, a thought of ill will arose in me. A thought of ruthlessness or inconsiderateness is another way of translating that, arose in me. I understood thus, this thought of being inconsiderate or ruthless has arisen in me. This leads to my own affliction, to the affliction of others, to the affliction of both. It obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from Nibbana. When I considered thus, it subsided in me. Whenever a thought of being ruthless arose in me, I abandoned it, removed it, and did away with it. So same thing, right? You know that it leads to harm when you have a thought of ill will, right? You understand how it hurts yourself and how you are creating all kinds of problems for yourself when you have ill will. It is, I think it's fairly obvious. In my life, I've always noticed that the people who are kind, who have a sense of compassion, they are the people who tend to be liked, right? Angry people don't really like angry people that much. You kind of be careful when people get too angry. You don't want to get too close. You're afraid you might get burned, right? The people with kindness are the people who tend to attract people or other people around them. This is the first thing. You tend to get very lonely if you have too much anger. And if you are ruthless, well, you get a bad reputation very quickly. And as in the previous ones, of course, also you heap up a lot of bad karma. You feel very bad inside. It is one of the most powerful contemplations about anger to make you understand the bad effects of anger. Is just to feel inside of you how you feel often about being angry afterwards. very often you feel deflated. You have an angry thought. How does an angry thought feel? Very often it saps your energy. It gives you a boost of energy right away, right? Anger, okay, self-righteous. But in the long term, it saps your energy, saps your mindfulness, saps your joy, saps the happiness of life, right? It draws that out of you. And when you see that, it becomes a very powerful source for not a very powerful motive for abandoning anger. You can see how it affects your mind very directly if you are mindful about it. Anyway, so very similar considerations here with anger and ill will, as I said previously, with sensual desire, but actually easier to see with anger than with sensual desire. And okay, then we have, I'm going to change one paragraph around. I'm going to skip one paragraph. This is because in the Agama version of the sutta, there's one paragraph comes before the other one. So we do the simile first of all. Just as in the last month of the rainy season, in the autumn when the crops thicken, a cowherd would guard his cows by constantly tapping and poking them on this side and that with a stick to check and curb them. Why is that? Because he sees that he could be flogged, imprisoned, fined or blamed if he lets the cows stray into the crops. So too I saw in unwholesome qualities the danger, degradation and defilement, and in wholesome states the blessing of renunciation, the aspect of cleansing. Right? So he had the cows. The cows is like the mind, right? So your mind is like a cow. Does that sound good? So you have this cow, you have this mind, right? So you tap it a bit on this side, don't walk there, don't this essential desire, don't go to essential desire, don't go to anger, middle path, right? Don't go into the crops. So this is what this is all about. So kind of heading in the right direction. And because he understands, right, that if the cows stray into the crops, he will be punished, right? Go to prison. And this is what it means. If you stray too much into ill will or whatever, you will get punished. You will get punished because you will feel bad. You will have all these negative consequences coming as a consequence. So it's just like you're asking for punishment. If you allow ill will to come into your mind, you are asking for punishment as a consequence. Why ask for punishment, right? It's a stupid thing to ask for. No need, enough punishment already in this world. Don't need to add anything to all the problems we already have. So once you get that into your mind, into your head, that that's what's happening, it becomes a powerful cause for avoiding that in the future. So that is that simile of the cows. And interestingly here, he saw in those unwholesome qualities the danger, adinava, degradation, okara. Okara means to make low. Right? I don't know if you notice that, but if you have a lot of bad qualities in your mind, it's like you feel lower in a sense. You don't feel so, you don't feel so good about yourself. You don't feel so good about yourself in the company of others and all these kind of things. And if your mind is full of bad qualities, but if your mind is full of good qualities, you feel at ease and relaxed in the presence of other people, and you feel much better about yourself as a consequence. I'm sure you have noticed that sometimes. And one of the things that it says in the suttas is that if you are a very virtuous person, if you have a lot of good qualities, you feel at ease, it says, in the assemblies, right? It's easy to kind of talk with people and to be, to talk to groups of people or whatever it is, because of those good qualities inside of you. So it has that added benefit as well. So you don't feel so low. You feel like equal to everybody else, right? You don't necessarily feel superior, but you feel that you have the authority to speak or whatever. So it makes you feel low these days, which is of course not very nice. It makes you feel defiled. You feel impure, right? It's not a nice feeling. You feel impure inside. The purity of the heart is a very beautiful feeling. The purity of heart is a feeling where you feel light, you feel mindful, you feel joyful. And it's a very good, positive feeling inside of you. Impurity is the opposite. You feel like dirty or whatever. This is why it is called defilements. And of course the wholesome states have the opposite, the blessing of renunciation, of giving things up, and the aspect of cleansing. And then we go back to the previous paragraph. Because whatever a person frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of their mind. If they frequently think and ponder upon thoughts of sensual desire, he has abandoned the thought of renunciation to cultivate the thought of sensual desire. And then his mind inclines to thoughts of sensual desire. If he frequently thinks and ponders upon thoughts of, that's a mistaken text, I think, of ill will or upon ruthlessness, he has abandoned the thought of non-ruthlessness or compassion to cultivate the thought of ruthlessness. And then his mind inclines to thoughts of ruthlessness. So this gives you an idea of how the mind works. The mind works according to habits, right? We are creature of habits, and this is one of the most difficult things on the Buddhist path, is precisely this effort we try to do to change our habit patterns, to move in a new way. Right? Sometimes there are certain people that give rise to certain reactions in us. Have you noticed that? This person comes into the room and straight away you feel something. Either maybe you like them or you don't like them, but there's like an emotional reaction that we have to certain people. Right? Or in families we're so close together, and we know that when this person says this thing, it always upsets you, right? Every time, because it's like a habit that has formed, like deep habit patterns that kind of informed inside of you. Very often this happens between husband and wife, right? They know how to push each other's buttons, right? How to kind of, get each other to react when they want to. This is because of the ancient habit patterns that have kind of been laid down in you over so many years. So this is the hardest thing about this path, is actually to challenge those habit patterns, to think in new ways. And in the beginning, it's quite harder. But what is interesting here, what is said, that if you frequently think and ponder upon these things, then gradually your mind is changing, right? If you frequently remind yourself of the danger of these things, and you forgive people, you have metta, you have compassion, you have understanding, you have all these good qualities, gradually your mind is changing, and your habits are changing. And after a while, you can't think bad thoughts anymore, right? Because your habit is to think good thoughts. This is what happens. And this is it's very nice when you see that happening inside of you. You see that the way that you think about other people, it is no longer the same from what it used to be. You used to be very upset by this person. Now you have compassion instead, because you realize actually it was that person's problem. It's not really your problem now. If you make it your problem, then of course that is where the problem arises. So you're laying down these new tracks in your brain. These days they talk about neuroscience, right? The tracks, kind of certain tracks that have been laid down, certain pathways in the brain that have kind of been established, so you have to think in a certain way. So you can imagine this is almost like laying down new tracks, erasing the old ones. Now your thoughts go through different pathways, and for that reason you are thinking differently. This is really what this is about. So you're creating new habits for yourself. And this, I think, is one of the most challenging things about the Buddhist path. It's actually to challenge your old habits. Start to think in new ways. And gradually, as you do that, it builds up momentum. And it becomes easier and easier and easier as you go along. Until one day, it becomes just natural. It becomes a matter of course that you are thinking in a new way. This is what this is all about, this idea of frequently thinking and pondering upon a certain thing, and then the opposite becomes abandoned because of that. So if you think a lot about sensual desire, the idea of renunciation becomes abandoned as a consequence, right? So you cultivate the opposite, and then you learn, and then the mind leads in a different direction. So here you can also see quite clearly that renunciation in the suttas is the opposite of sensual desire. So it is about non-sensuality is really what is the main focus of renunciation in the suttas. Okay, so that is the negative side of the sutta. This is all about how to overcome the bad thoughts. And the next side of the sutta is how to develop the good thoughts instead. And this is even nicer. Sometimes when we talk about all this bad stuff, it's too bad, but now we talk about the positive side instead. As I abide in thus, heedful, energetic, and with effort, the thought of renunciation arose in me. I understood thus, this thought of renunciation has arisen in me. This does not lead to my own affliction or to the affliction of others, or to the affliction of both. It aids wisdom, does not cause difficulties, and it leads to nibbana. If I think and ponder upon this thought, even for a night, even for a day, even for a night and day, I see nothing to fear from it. But with excessive thinking and pondering, I might tire my body. And when the body is tired, the mind becomes strained. And when the mind is strained, it is far from stillness. So I studied, and my mind internally quieted, brought into singleness and stilled it. Why is that? So that my mind should not be strained. This is very interesting. And it fits in very well with what we were saying in the previous sutta. So it's worth while just considering this briefly before we move on now. So now he's using the opposite. He is seeing the thought of renunciation, which means like the thought of giving up sensuality, giving up attachments, right? No, I don't want that. Giving it all up. And he's seeing the benefit of that. That's really what it means. So it's like, Because like when you go forward, try to become a monastic or whatever, say, okay, I'm going to give up that all that other stuff. Or when you sit in the QT by yourself, you go on a meditation retreat and you think, let the whole world be, leave it all behind. I don't want to deal with it. That's like a thought of renunciation. And then you understand that this does not lead to problems, right? It doesn't lead to suffering. It aids wisdom because you get clarity of mind. It does not cause difficulty. There's no pain involved with that. Pain is letting go of, and it leads towards nibbana. Right? It leads towards this extinguishment of all the problems, all the fires inside, all the agitation, all the things, all that gets extinguished. And you feel cool and nice inside as a consequence. So thoughts of renunciation, and even more obvious with thoughts of non-ill will. Thoughts of non-ill will, you can call it thoughts of metta, loving kindness if you like. Not exactly the same, but very close to each other. And then thoughts of non-cruelty or being considerate. I like thoughts of very close related thoughts of compassion. All of these things are part of this. And then it says, because they all lead in the right direction, he said there's nothing to see no fear from it, even if you think about this for a whole day or a whole night or a whole night and day. So these things are not dangerous. They're okay. They lead in the right direction. But, and this is the interesting part here, right? With excessive thinking and pondering, I might tire my body. And when the body is tired, the mind becomes strained. And when it is strained, it is far from stillness. So this is very similar to what we're seeing in the previous sutta, is that it is not enough just to get to the point where you have nice thoughts and you think about things in a nice way. Ultimately, if you want to find true meaning and true relaxation and true true release from problems, you have to give up thinking altogether. Even the good thoughts, right? Even the thoughts that accord with the Dhamma, accord with the teaching, have eventually to be given up. And only then do you come to a true sense of peace, like the real holiday, right? People think they go on holidays overseas. No, it's just more stress. They come back, I don't know about here, but in Australia, people go overseas, have a holiday. Oh, really tiring holiday. Doing so many things, running around and all this stuff. Oh, glad to be back at work again. But sometimes it's like that. So the real holiday, the problem is that we are not able to give ourselves a holiday because our minds are so hyperactive. The real holiday happens when everything calms down, everything becomes beautiful inside. You become incredibly peaceful, and that is when you have a real holiday. What does it feel like to have a real holiday? You feel energized afterwards, right? It's the opposite of being tired. You feel energized. When you come out of a state of samadhi, Ajahn Brahmali is famous for very profound samadhi. He says you feel like a nuclear reactor when you come out, right? Would you like to feel like a nuclear reactor? No. Too much energy? I don't know, feel like a nuclear reactor, right? So this is incredible amounts of energy, and that's how you know you've been on a real holiday. You really have relaxed, right? So this is what this is about. So if you really want to relax, all the thinking has to be let go of. But of course, it is very easy to let go of the kind thoughts. It is the unkind thoughts, the defilements that are hard to let go of. These kind ones are relatively easy to let go of. Not entirely easy, because even that last amount of samadhi can be hard to attain, because you have to let go of other things like the sense of self, that sort of thing, but still probably easier. So it is a little bit, the way it is expressed here is perhaps a little bit unusual. Thinking and pondering might tire the body. What does that mean? Why does it tire the body? Why does it tire the mind? What's that supposed to mean now? And I am not 100% sure what it means, to be honest with you. But one way of interpreting that is to think of it as the brain getting tired, right? The physical body getting tired. If you think a lot, it will affect the physical body. And often you see that. You go to work, you work very hard, you concentrate on things, maybe things you don't find so interesting, and when you come back home in the evening, you feel exhausted as a consequence. So this may be a physical tiredness, that if the mind had been released from the body, it might not have felt that tiredness in the same way. So it may be related to the physical body. That's just my speculation. The word body, kaya, in Pali can mean different things, so it is not it's not 100% clear-cut. That is certainly one interpretation. And of course, when the physical body is tired, as we were saying before, because the brain is a filter for the mind, it will also affect the mind. So the mind, as it says here, becomes strained as a consequence. And when it is strained, it is far from stillness, far from samadhi. And then we have these terms that we heard before. So I steadied my mind eternally, quieted it, brought it to singleness, and stilled it. And this you probably remember from the previous sutta, exactly the same words, right? These are the words that mean taking the mind to jhanas, to the samadhi states. Basically it means the jhanas. And in the suttas, the jhanas, they come up soon afterwards. Why is that? So my mind should not be strained. So this is how the Buddha practicing before his awakening. Okay, so let's just, I'll just have a few more minutes, so I'll just finish off this sutta.
Yes.
And it says, next one here, that as I abide with us, diligent, ardent, or heedful, energetic, and with effort, the thought of non-ill will, or perhaps metta, arose in me. A thought of compassion arose in me. I understood thus, this thought of compassion has arisen in me. This does not lead to my own suffering, to the suffering of others, or to the suffering of both. It aids wisdom, does not cause pain and difficulties, and leads to extinguishment. If I think and ponder upon this thought, even for a night, even for a day, even for a night and day, I see nothing to fear from it. But with excessive thinking and pondering, I might tire my body. And when the body is tired, the mind becomes strained. And when the mind is strained, it is far from samadhi, from stillness. So I steadied my mind internally, quieted it, brought it to singleness, and stilled it. Why is that? So that my mind should not be strained. So all of these beautiful thoughts, which all are leading in the right way, eventually you have to give them up as well and enter a state of samadhi. Just skipping one paragraph and going to the second last one. Just as in the last month of the hot season, when all the crops had been brought inside the villages, the cowherd would guard his cows while staying at the root of a tree or out in the open, since he needs only to be mindful that the cows are there. So too, there was need for me only to be mindful that those states were there. So now there is no crops to be eaten, so the cows are kind of not going to do the wrong thing. And so the cowherder sits down at the root of a tree, relaxing, chilling out, and not having to be too worried about things. All he has to do is to make sure the cows are there. You can't really afford to lose the cows, because if you lose the cows, right, that will be getting in trouble as well now. And in the same way, you have to be mindful that those states are there. You can't afford to lose those states. So you have to make sure that those mental qualities, they remain in your mind, right? This is what this is referring to. And then we backtrack to the previous paragraph. Bhikkhus, whatever a bhikkhu frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of his mind. If he frequently thinks and ponders upon thoughts of renunciation, he has abandoned the thought of sensual desire to cultivate the thought of renunciation, and then his mind inclines to thoughts of renunciation. If he frequently thinks and ponders upon thoughts of metta, thoughts of kindness, upon thoughts of compassion, he has abandoned the thought of ruthlessness to cultivate the thought of compassion, and then his mind inclines to thoughts of compassion. This is what we're trying to do here. Redirect the mind, direct the mind in a different way. So instead of having all these thoughts coming up all the time, which we don't really want to, instead the mind naturally comes up with a good and positive thoughts. And remember now to the sutta I was talking about earlier this morning about the mountain, making a mountain of good actions. Remember that one? Right? So this is what this is about. The mind inclining in the right way. It means that you have made a mountain of good actions. It means that when you sit down and when you sit back, it is natural for the mind to go to the good thoughts, right? So when you come on a meditation retreat or you meditate, all you have to do is sit back and wait. And as you sit back and wait, as you calm down, you allow your tiredness or restlessness or whatever it is, you allow that to disappear, to dissipate. Then the natural underlying state, which is deep inside of you, is the state which is the natural tendency of your mind to be kind, to be compassionate, to renounce these things. Because this is the natural underlying state of mind. Once your tiredness goes away, once the restlessness dies down, this is what arises in your mind. This is how meditation works, right? And this is why very often all you have to do, especially when you're starting off a meditation retreat, all you have to do is just wait. And you wait and you wait until the natural state underneath arises inside of you. That is the ideal way of doing meditation practice. You have put into place all the right things, you have directed your mind in the right way, and then when you want to meditate, it just happens. Easy, right? So easy. And this is wonderful. It's so easy because it means that nothing much you have to do. Just wait, just sit back. You don't need to kind of do all this. So this is kind of the ideal, and it's so good that it should be easy because it's not. We want our spiritual path should be one which is happy, which is fun. We can feel relaxed, right? You don't want to stress out. There's enough stress in the world already. You don't want to make this life also into stressful. And this is kind of the beauty of this. This path is, when it's practiced in the right way, a very beautiful path that can alleviate so many of the problems in life. This is what we're seeing here. Okay. There's one sentence left of this particular sutta. I'll read it out as well, just so we can read it. Tireless energy was aroused in me, and unremitting mindfulness was established. My body was tranquil and untroubled. My mind was stilled and unified. Tireless energy, right? You have abandoned all the defilements. You have concentrated the mind. Energy inside of you is just bubbling up. This is one of those beautiful things about Buddhist teaching, is that at the beginning of the path, you have to create the energy. You have to make an effort to make the path work. But as the path kind of becomes more natural, the energy comes up inside you, it comes naturally. You don't have to exert yourself anymore. The energy is there, right? This is the difference between the word virya and the word vayama in the Pali language. Vayama means you are exerting yourself, or padana also means you're exerting yourself. This is the sixth factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. Once you get the meditation becomes deep, once the samadhi starts to bite, there's a natural source of energy inside of you. Energy just comes up. And this is what it means. Tireless energy. The energy doesn't run out. You don't have to make it. It's a natural part of you. Unremitting mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is strong. It doesn't it doesn't disappear. It is there all the time. It is strong, always there, because the energy is strong, because the joy is there, the mindfulness is also there. It is so nice to be in the present moment. You don't want to be anywhere else. If you don't want to be in the past and the future, because the present moment is so nice, well, that's where you're going to be. And the mind is glued into the present moment. That is what it is saying here. The body is tranquil, it is untroubled, right? When you meditate, always make sure the body is happy first of all. Because when the body is at ease, it means it's much easier to be mindful. And if the body is troubled and you have tensions or whatever it is, starting off with the body, making the body kind of disappear into the background. That's what's going on here. The mind is unified and still as a consequence. And of course, from there, that is where you go into samadhi again, just as we saw in the previous sutta. Okay, so that is all for now. So.